Hello, greetings, listener, and Happy New Year to you. Welcome to 2026. What an entertaining year it has already been. I would like today to speak to you about a man and his journeys and his place within our society that you probably already know about if you were a kid like me who was on the student council and was part of the donation program that this individual was so instrumental in setting up. And that is none other than Rick Mercer. And Rick Mercer traveled across the country for decades, has been a patriotic Canadian, has told the stories of many of the people that couldn't themselves, has advocated for the cultural development of this country, and the sort of the telling. I already said this, but the telling of tales that normally people would know, and therefore people might say something stupid, as Mercer would say, like Canada doesn't have a culture. What is Canadian culture? Well, as Rick Mercer would say, well, look around, go travel, go talk to people, go to Boreal, Canada, go to Newfoundland, go to the Yukon, go to northern BC, go to, certain parts of, ballrooms of Toronto and Vancouver. You can find culture, and Rick Mercer essentially has based his career off of articulating what that culture is. But I think that he is in a little bit of a predicament. And I think that maybe he realizes that. And maybe he speaks to his family about that after long days of work and of writing. And maybe he feels like he can't express it. But I think he feels out of place. And so I'm titling this video Rick Mercer versus Managerialism. Because I think that Rick Mercer, although being aligned with CBC, being aligned with Radio Canada, being aligned with the sort of Ottawa bureaucracy, being aligned with the public establishment of the country, who have supported him and uplifted his journalism, and for good reason. Rick Mercer is very talented, very likable, but I think that he is in great tensions with the attitudes of a lot of these people in such institutions and in the sort of the way that they operate today. So what do I mean? Rick Mercer, and I'll link this in the YouTube video. Rick Mercer did a comedy special on CBC, because CBC is a comedy, sub component of their Crown Corporation. He did a stand-up comedy routine on CBC Comedy. It wasn't much of a laughing effect. People laughed, but it was, a lot of it was just sort of a speech. A lot of it was almost like a political speech you would hear someone from a previous era give to motivate the audience back when people actually knew anything about the history and culture of their own country. Like you can motivate people by appealing to these times and these places and these feelings, which many of us have lost the conscience of today. So Rick Mercer gets up to the stage and starts talking about how we need to change the education system. A little bit of silence in the room. Yeah, and you start to hear an applause. People clapped at it. But what is he going to say? Change the education system. Like, that's saying a lot. And he starts going how kids need to learn about Canadian history. We need to authoritatively say to children, you are going to learn about Canadian history, and we are going to be proud of it. Well, not that we're going to be proud of this history, but we are going to proudly teach this history. Nerves in the room. That's quite a radical statement. Because the less an ideology and more so just a way of being, a practice, the practice that is developed in our society, with it being so focused on liability, not being sued, making sure PR is okay, making sure no one complains, making sure you don't get fired. The attitudes and the practices of our society is one in which history always needs to be prefaced. History can't be taught in a passionate way. History can't be taught in a way that isn't apologized for. History, there needs to be, sort of caution tales before learning anything about history. And therefore, a lot of teachers have just chosen to teach it in a very milquetoast and dry manner. and not really get into the weeds. And it's the weeds where people find the most interesting things. It's where the treasure is found. It's where the depth is found. And Rick Mercer is telling this to the big audience, like, we need to teach about the sort of the troubled but magical people in our country's history. He had this great line about how we need to, there's the drunkards and the sodomites and the sort of the pirates in Canadian history, and that's just Parliament in the 1970s. Like that was really funny because it makes you think of the old voyages of the Scots, Irish, and the Métis, and the French. And then it juxtaposes that to like the Liberal Party in the 1970s, which had plenty of personal problems themselves. Pierre Elliott Trudeau's marriage was quite messy, as was articulated in Justin Trudeau's book Common Ground that came out in 2014, which I just finished reading. I didn't finish reading it, if I'm being honest. Like, my God, Christ. It was tough to get through. Thanks, Justin. Anyway, so Rick Mercer's making this compelling case to reintroduce intrigue into teaching of Canadian history, but we've completely lost the art, partially because now teachers' colleges can't even expect to get people into their into their programs with any knowledge of Canadian history themselves, so they end up giving accreditations to people that are going to teach Canadian history that have no knowledge and passion for it themselves. And so then we get people that are forced to teach World War I history in grade 10. And Arthur Currie ordered them into battle. Oh, they don't even say it like that. They'll just kind of give them, Vimy Ridge, Vimy Ridge, Vimy Ridge. Right? And I sat through this in grade 10, and maybe you did too. And perhaps you had a really good high school teacher, and they have, of course, in the previous era, this was taught probably in a very exciting way. And even there are some history teachers today in our school systems that are wonderful and are good at what they do and ought to be upheld. And they ought to win awards for what they do. And Rick Mercer ought to talk to them. He probably already has done so many times. But on a broad macro level, there is a problem here, and Mercer identifies it. And so I think that he is in a sort of silent war with the attitudes and ideas of the people that were probably in the audience of that CBC special in that auditorium hall, which I don't know where. I think it was in Toronto. Not sure exactly where. And this is the sort of uncomfortable battle of ideas that people wage. And this is why people sort of transitioning in their politics and in moving in other directions politically and sort of dislodging themselves from a certain political clique. It takes time because you start saying things that are a little bit against the grain and people start giving you different reactions. Reactions that are not hostile but skeptical. And you start not feeling like you're getting good positive feedback for what you're saying. And then you start thinking more about your differences. And I'm wondering if Rick Mercer is in a period of contemplation about that. Perhaps the people, the organizations that have been with him through thick and thin, maybe they have a different conception of Canadian patriotism. Maybe they have a different conception of where the country is going in the future. The image of the country. Maybe Newfoundland. Maybe the image of what Newfoundland will look like in 100 years is not the same to them as it is for Mr. Mercer. And I'm wondering if he's thought that, or maybe I'm interpreting way too much, but I just couldn't help by, from seeing that speech, seeing the animation in his voice, and then juxtaposing that to the educational experience that I got, and juxtaposing that to the attitudes that I see within many elements of our sort of our culture. I think that we need to follow Mercer's energy, and we need to try to keep that energy within the mainstream, because he has done that. We need to continue that tradition after he retires, because it's an important one. The stories, right? History is not simply about dates, although dates are very important because you can tell a sort of chronology and you can understand the timeline to which things changed. Like the timeline, the amount of time that depressions last. These are all important sort of scientific history points to know. But for the average layman, it's really the stories that count. It's really the essence of people, the essence of a community, and the essence of the essence of what a community goes through at a certain time period. That's what creates the spark for learning about one's ancestors, for learning about one's culture and the history thereof. And I just don't think that many of the producers of CBC today have that energy or spark. I think that just like David Cayley wrote in his book on CBC, which I'll link, and it was a fantastic book that came out this year, CBC has adopted a sort of universalized culture that ultimately originates in America. That is ultimately, geared around a sort of pop culture that doesn't recognize individual idiosyncrasies or, unique cultural experiences within certain localities or provinces or regions. And it actually, it punches through those boundaries and assumes that everybody thinks and acts the same. Cayley writes on this brilliantly, and I'll link that book in this video. But anyway, so I find that difference to be fascinating between Mercer and the managerial class. And maybe Mercer later on, maybe he already has somewhere, maybe he's talked about the differences in his attitudes versus others, but I'll leave it there. But I hope to meet him one day. He's a great man, great Canadian. And cheers.